Hello, how's everyone doing today? Great to see all of you this afternoon. If you don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm the program coordinator here at the library, and it's always so fun to welcome you here. Are there people that haven't been here before? Raise your hand if you've never been to a program before. Yeah, there's people that I thought were new faces, so welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. Hopefully you can come check out some of the rest of our programming coming up. I just have a few things I want to say, and then we'll bring today's speaker, Roger, up. One of those is remember to turn your cell phone off. You don't want to be the person whose cell phone goes off in the middle of this presentation. So quick reminder there. Secondly, in this week of Thanksgiving, I want to say a very special thank you to the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory Foundation. That's our fundraising arm here at the library that allows us to do all of these programs. All of our programming that we do here in the community room for the most part, and a lot of our collection development for new books and movies and everything else that we have is funded through our foundation. And so if you're interested in getting involved or in making a donation, we would greatly appreciate that. It's really easy to do. You can do it online, or you can pick up an envelope in the back of the room or ask any staff as well. So thank you very much to all of you that have donated and to our foundation for the work they do on our behalf. One other thing I wanted to remind everybody about is that we have a lot of exciting programming coming up in the months ahead. If you haven't already, pick up one of our program guides. We have our new one out now, so those are in the back of the room. You can pick them up. It's also available online. Even in the next couple weeks, we have some great programs. Next Wednesday at the Rancho Mirage Amphitheater. So it's going to be a library program, but it's free, and it's at the Rancho Mirage Amphitheater at the community park just down the street. And we're going to have California Cabaret, which is a great show of singing and dancing. It's going to be a lot of fun. So it's next Wednesday, November 30th at 7 p.m. at the Rancho Mirage Amphitheater. But now I get to introduce somebody I've been really excited about this talk for a while. So one of the cool things I have a lot of great things about my job, but one of the things I like are the random emails I get with suggestions for programs. And sometimes they're out there a little bit. And Roger's, I was like, I don't know much about pickleball, so I got his. And I read it, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. I know that there are a lot of people playing pickleball. And then I think it was like the last sentence of the email, by the way, I was on the cover of USA Today. I was like, okay. So I found he sent me the link and read his amazing story and was just absolutely fascinated. And then this was during the pandemic, or right before the pandemic, maybe, when you first contacted me. So one of the programs that we did during the pandemic was a video podcast, which we called Curiosity Trap. We found people we were curious about and interviewed them. So I was able to interview some really fascinating people, from the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, to local Bill Marks, to Mark Pine, who runs the Griffith Observatory. And so you can actually check those out. They're on our YouTube page. You may have seen them on Rancho Mirage TV. But one of the most interesting and fun interviews by far, and where I learned probably the most, was in talking to Roger BelAir. From laughing to almost coming to tears at one point. It was a fascinating conversation and a story that I know you all are going to enjoy. So I'm going to let Roger tell you a bit more about his story and his background. Feel free to check out the extended conversation version online. But now it's my pleasure. And Roger, he wanted me to point out that although he is now an expert at pickleball, he did spend most of his career in the finance industry. So he has gone from that to what I'm now calling the pioneer of prison pickleball. So please help me welcome Roger BelAir.
Well, I have to ask, how many pickleball players do we have here? Oh, my. If I would have asked that question 4 or 5 years ago, there may be half a dozen hands that went up. And now I just look out, and there's so many. And pickleball is everywhere. You can't pick up the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, Washington Post without seeing an article about once a week. But here's my favorite headline. It came out of the New Yorker not too long ago. Can pickleball save America? Now, I don't know about you, but I think if it's going to do that, it better hurry up. All right? Last year, I was talking to a reporter from the Boston Globe, and we chatted, and a couple of days later, he came out with this headline: pickleball is growing at an almost unprecedented rate in the history of American sports. Now, as TJ just said, I'm a financial guy. I'm a bean counter. I don't buy into those marketing terms, all that hype, like almost unprecedented rate. But here's something I can relate to. This is from Google, and this is the interest in pickleball over the last few years. And it's going just almost straight up. You know, everybody's fascinated with this sport, and we're going to talk a little bit about why they are. And I think this next slide this dude kind of has it figured out as far as the perspective that many of us have. You're not playing pickleball, you will soon be, all right? So, for those of you that haven't played, if you see people on a court, it looks something like this. And you say, well, that looks a lot like tennis. Well, it sure does. Most of the rules, many of the rules come from tennis. But there's a couple major distinctions. First of all, rather than a tennis ball that can go 100 miles an hour, you have a wiffle ball. Top speed maybe 35, 40 miles an hour. And because of that, you use a paddle rather than a racket. And not only that, but the other big factor is played on a badminton court. Now, a badminton court's about a third the size of a tennis court. So what you have is you have something that's a lot different game, even though a lot of the rules are the same as in tennis. And but so that's what really the game is. But I think the key question is, why is this sport growing so fast? And there's several reasons for that. First of all, it's easy to learn. I mean, there's only 3 basic rules. You can learn the game in an hour. That's not true of a lot of sports. I've been trying to learn golf for 40 years, all right? But I got a friend, Andy, who's sitting out here somewhere, and Andy goes out and plays golf, and then he goes home and he hates himself. So, I don't know how much I miss him by not playing golf. It's great exercise, but it's easy on the joints. Tennis is a super game, but after a certain age, it's kind of challenging as far as what it does to the knees. It's cheap. You don't have to spend more than $100 for a paddle. I mean, they'll last for a couple, 3 years, and a ball's only a couple, $3. All right, it's a very reasonable price sport. It's very social, and normally a game takes about 15 minutes. And so you got 4 people on a court. They exit the court. They go to the sidelines, and they put their paddle down. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of paddles lined up in a queue. And so it's the next 4 people in. Well, the way this game has evolved is what happens is you spend a lot of time on the sidelines waiting to get in. So you form these relationships with other people. And so on a given day, you might play with 8, 10, 12, 14 different people. And that's one of the reasons it's so successful, is because of the social aspect. It can be played by young. This kid, now he understands one key principle of the game, which is keep your eye on the ball. The curling of the tongue is optional. This little girl picked up the game at the age of 10. At the age of 12, she started entering tournaments and was winning them. At the age of 14, she was the best woman player in the world. Anna Lee Waters. At the Nationals a couple of weeks ago, she walked away. She entered 3 events, and she walked away with 3 medals, gold medals. Her favorite playing partner is her mother. Last year they won the gold. So Anna Lee is 15 now, and I can share with you what her next goal is to get a driver's license. Yeah. So it's played by young and it's played by people that are older. Here's a couple of my friends. Mitsu is in her mid-70s. I saw her a couple weeks ago, and she said that she was celebrating her 30th anniversary. So I said, well, Mitsu, congratulations to you and your husband. Her response was, husband? He doesn't have anything to do with this. I'm talking about 30 years of playing pickleball. Huh? Gil is 87. He's 87 and has a great game. You don't want to make him mad out in the courts because he'll take it out on you. Now, do you see many 80-year-olds out on the courts? Well, yeah. This tournament, you got to be 80 in order to enter it. Okay. Here's a couple old geezers. Bob is 93. I said to him, Bob, pickleball keep you young? He said, not really. He said, Roger, what keeps me young is my 72-year-old wife. And every night a stiff martini. All right. Many people who pick up this game, they just love it. And that's what they think about. They become addicted to it, like Peggy. My name is Peggy, and I'm a pickleball addict. Many of us can relate to that. But the number one reason people play this game is it's just plain fun. And you go out on the courts, and oftentimes you'll hear people say, OMG. And you know what OMG is, don't you? What is it? No, one more game. No. So, about the history of the game, how did this sport come up together? And it was really founded by what I call three desperate dads dealing with bored kids over on Bainbridge Island, which is right outside of Seattle. They had summer cabins over there. Joel Pritchard and Bill Bell were out playing golf one day. They came home and the kids were bored. I'm bored. There's nothing to do on the rock. I want to go back and see my friends in Seattle. That type of stuff, kids type stuff. So Joel says to them, I said, well, go on outside and play some badminton. So they get out there. They set everything up and they can't find the birdies. No birdies to be found. About that time, Dickie Green, age 13, is walking down the street with a wiffle ball and a plastic bat. They take it, they try to hit it over the net. Well, they couldn't do it with a badminton racket, so they grabbed some ping pong paddles. And that's the beginning of the game in 1965. The court looked like this at that time, and it still looks very much the same way. After a couple of days, they lowered the net, and they found that was even more fun. Now, the ping pong paddles kept breaking, so Barney McCallum, he had some tools in his shop, and he fashioned an oversized ping pong paddle that looked like this. And this was really the paddle that was used up until about 1985. At that time, a guy that worked for Boeing said, you know, these paddles are just so heavy, and we can do better. So he worked for Boeing. He went down to Boeing Supply and bought some of those material that they make the floors in airplanes in and fashioned a new type of paddle. It looks an awful lot like this. I got to know Barney fairly well, and he was a character. He passed away about 2 or 3 years ago. At the age of 93, I met him when he was about 90. And sometimes in a relationship, you just hit it off. And that was what happened with Barney and myself. And I'd visit him every once a month or something like that. And I'll always remember one of my favorite memories of Barney is he was in a retirement home, and one morning I walked into the complex, and I knocked on his door. He knew I was coming. He said, Roger, come in. Of course I did. He says, well, do you want a cup of coffee, or would you prefer a shot of whiskey? I said, Barney, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. You know before noon I don't drink coffee. All right. We had a glass of orange juice that morning. All right. So one question, I do a lot of teaching pickleball. I've taught a couple thousand people, and one question that always comes up is, Where did they get the name pickleball? And here's what happened according to Barney and others have told me this. You can imagine over on Bainbridge Island, they got these houses right next to each other. Everybody knows everybody, they have for years. And what happens around 5 o'clock is they get together for a cocktail, a happy hour. Now, they used to call it a game. You know, you want a game tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Does that work for everybody? They just called it the game. But they said, we should really come out with a real name for this sport. So they batted around some ideas like rally ball or tennis pong. They just didn't seem right. Finally, somebody said, you know, Pritchard, you got that dog Pickles. Grabs the ball, runs off the court, under the bushes. We got to get on our hands and knees to get the ball. It's actually Pickles ball, so let's just call it pickleball. Everybody laughed. And somebody said, that's great, let's have another drink. So here's Pickles, all right? So that's where the name came from. Now, I've been playing for years. My wife and I frequently watch 60 Minutes on Sunday night. We enjoy it very much. And one Sunday night, about 5, 6 years ago, we're watching it, and Leslie Stahl has a segment on Sheriff Tom Dart. Now, Tom does his best to run Cook County Jail in Chicago. And what a challenging job that is. You know, they have more homicides in Cook County than LA and New York combined. What a challenging position. And I'm looking at these pictures that Leslie's showing, and the men and women are just kind of sitting around, hanging out, not doing much. And I said to my wife, they should be playing pickleball. Pickleball, that's what they should be doing. Matter of fact, they'd be getting exercise, they'd learn life skills like sportsmanship, maybe thinking about consequences. I'm going to write Sheriff Dart a letter, and I'm going to tell him exactly what I think, and I'll even fly back there and teach the game to those men and women on the inside. Well, she didn't quite share my enthusiasm. It started with an eyebrow that went up. She said, your intentions are good, but don't be disappointed if you don't get a response. Well, that's all I needed. Of course, I had to write the letter then. And I did. Now, here's the backstory of what happened. He gets this letter, thinks kook, puts it on the side of his desk. That night, over dinner, he has 2 or 3 kids. He just happened to mention that he got this letter from this guy out in Seattle, something about balls and pickles, and, you know, just shrugged his shoulders. And his 8-year-old daughter put her hands on her hips and said, Dad, I'll tell you about pickleball. If it hadn't been for that 8-year-old daughter, I wouldn't be here today, and neither would you. It wasn't too long after that I was on a plane back to Chicago. Took an Uber, dropped me off in front of this sign. Now, I'd never been inside a jail or a prison before. I mean, the closest I ever came is I had my car towed once because I was illegally parked. That's how much I knew about what goes on the inside. Of course, I was scared. I looked around. I couldn't believe the size of this place. I mean, it's the size of about 100 football fields. They have 60,000 to 70,000 people that flow through there every year. I'm overwhelmed. At that side, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to get lost. All right? I was there a week, and when I came out, I looked back at the sign, and I realized how much I had learned about what goes on the inside. The first thing I learned is most of these young men, and most of them are young, and most of them are men, never had much of a chance in life. They grew up in poverty, often a dysfunctional household. The people that they respect most, generally, are the older kids in the neighborhood. Well, that's just code for saying gang members. See, there's 57 major gangs in Chicago. They have over 100,000 members. They outnumber the cops 10 to 1. For many of them, it wasn't a matter if they're going to choose, if they were going to join a gang, it's which one they were going to choose for protection. And being a gang member is like being in the mafia. You want to impress your friends, you want to move up the organization, you get involved in crime. Well, sooner or later, you're going to end up in Cook County Jail. TJ mentioned I had a financial background. Once I was in a meeting with Warren Buffett, and somebody asked him the question, said, Warren, why are you so successful? He thought for a moment and said, well, probably more than anything else is I happen to be born into an environment, born into a situation, a family with a certain set of values. And then as I grew up, I had mentors who reflected those values. I think of that because Warren ended up on one end of our society, and the guys that we're talking about today are at the other end. The second thing I learned is, this blew me away, how much mental illness there is on the inside. I mean, I couldn't believe it. You sit down and you talk to some of these individuals, and you can tell they're just not tracking. They're just kind of half a beat off. Now, it's not really appropriate to say to somebody on the inside, you know, what'd you do? Why are you here? Trying to think of a comparison. It's, well, maybe on the outside it's similar to asking somebody their age. You know, somebody might not care, somebody would care, somebody might tell you the truth, somebody tell you the truth minus 5 years. But I was sitting on the bench during that week with an individual I was relating with particularly well, and all of a sudden the words popped out of my mouth is, what did you do? Why are you here? He looked at me right in the eye, and he gave me an honest answer. He said, I'm bipolar, I was off my meds, and I didn't mean to kill him. Those are the type of conversations you never forget. How many lives were touched by that senseless act? I've thought of that, you know, I don't even remember his name, but I've thought of that situation many times. And after that, I started doing more of a deep dive into what goes on the inside. And here's one of the things I learned is for many, these are different countries around the world that have per 100,000 people, how many people are incarcerated? And you can look at Australia or Mexico or whatever, and you see maybe 100, maybe 200. Now, some of you are out there saying, well, wait a minute, where's the old US of A? Well, here we are. Right or wrong, good or bad, we believe in lock them up. Lock them up. Now, has it always been this way? Well, no. Here's the past 100 years. Look at this chart. What happened? How did we end up in this type of situation? Well, there's two major factors. The first one is, back in the 1950s, we decided as a society that it wasn't right or correct to lock people up who had mental problems. So we started closing down those mental facilities. Now, where did these people end up? Well, they end up, many of them in jail. Sheriff Tom Dart says maybe 30-40% of his population in Cook County Jail shouldn't be there because of mental problems. Maybe they still need to be locked up, but they shouldn't be in jail. Second factor is drugs. The war on drugs. It actually started with Nixon. And then what happened was Reagan came along and he put his stamp of approval on it. Remember, what is it? Don't say no, or just say no? Yeah. And what happened was, you can see what happened to the population. Now, I'm not trying to be critical at all of that type of thinking because it makes so much sense. It's so rational. You got bad actors in your society that are causing all kinds of problems. You take them out of society, and things ought to get a lot better. Well, has it? Well, maybe, but at the same time, 3 out of 4 of us feel that a lot more needs to be done as far as violent crime. So those are a couple of the things I learned after being there for a week. I went inside, I went through clearance, and I'm handed this letter. Now, the reason I point this letter out to you, it basically says Roger BelAir is here for a week to teach pickleball. But what I wanted to point out is it was sent to 11 different department heads. I mean, it's a really big thing at the time when I went in there to teach pickleball. Now, I found myself next in front of about 25 young men, and I thought I'd start out by just giving a little background about myself, very briefly, and Joe Pritchard and Barney McCallum and how the game came together. And boy, it was not working. Arms were crossed. They're looking around the room. They had absolutely no interest at all in anything I had to say. We didn't relate at all. And there was a couple factors for that. I'm not sure any of them were over 30. When I was 30, Gerald Ford was president. You know, the second thing is they're from Chicago and I'm from Seattle. Now, let me give you an example to show what I mean by that. If somebody, like what just happened at Colorado Springs, kills 5 people, or last week at the University of Idaho where 4 people were killed, it's headline news. It's national news, and it should be. But if 1 or 2 people are killed by somebody with a gun, it generally doesn't make big headlines. Last year in Cook County, there was 1,002 homicides. 1,002. That's more than 2 a day people that are being murdered. Much of it is gang-on-gang violence. I'm absolutely blown away by that statistic. Seattle, by comparison, had 40 people, which is still too many. Not knowing what to do, I thought of my wife's comment that my intentions were good, of course, and it wasn't a good idea. I didn't know how I'd be on an airplane going back to Seattle. I said, well, let's just go out this courts. And so here we were, and I would say in a matter of 5 minutes, everything changed. They went from having absolutely no interest in what I had to say at all to listening to every single word. They were fascinated. The best way for me to describe it, it was like kids on a playground. They were like 3rd graders. Here's a couple more pictures. You can see who's having fun and who isn't. Here we are, and I'm going over the rules. I say to the guys, there's 2 reasons to follow the rules. I give them the reason number 1, and then I move on and I talk about something else. And of course, what happens is somebody always stops me and say, hey, wait a minute. Roger, what about the second reason to follow the rules? And I said, well, that's easy. Just do it Roger's way, and nobody gets hurt. They all laugh, but they all follow my rules. All right? At the end of the game, it's really common in pickleball, as you guys know that play it, to tap paddles. Now, I thought it was a good idea, rather than call it just tap paddles, to give this ritual a name. So I did. I called it a group hug. All right? So you have these great big burly guys after a game say, all right, everybody, group hug. All right? Once in a while, somebody say, Roger, is that really one of the rules, or did you make it up? And I said, absolutely, it's one of the rules. What are they going to do? They're not going to go ask the warden. The warden doesn't know. All right? Okay. So I've been back to Chicago 3 times, and the last time I was there, I walked in the gym, and I felt like a rock star. They're all standing, clapping. Roger's here, everybody. Who was there that day also was a sports reporter for USA Today. And he was there to write an article for the sports page. He interviewed me and some of the other guys, and then what happens a couple of days later, he calls me up and he says, Roger, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's not going to be on the sports page. And of course, my heart just dropped. I said, oh no, why are they killing the story? I thought it was a good story. I've told several people. Oh, geez, I'm going to be embarrassed. Why did I tell anybody? Then he goes on to say they're going to put it on the front page. And here it is, and you can find it online. And I want to talk about a couple things that are said by different individuals in this article. The first one is by Ryan. Now, Ryan's the first one to admit that he's made some mistakes in life. That tattoo on his forehead is to cover a gang symbol. He has a wife, a couple kids, and he's really trying to turn his life around. Now, you can just imagine, guilty or innocent, if you go to a place like Cook County Jail, everybody's been charged with serious crimes, how much stress there is. So there's an awful lot of violence and there's an awful lot of fights. Here's what Ryan has to say. I'm trying to change my life. Pickleball helps bring down the stress. This is Al. He's 19 here. When he was 18, he tried to kill somebody. I found his comments particularly interesting because on the inside what you have is what I call the prison strut. And you've seen it all on the local news, where they're bringing some dude in that's going in front of a judge. And it's Mr. Tough Guy, you can't hurt me, I can take on the world. That kind of strut that I have all the answers. And what Al says is it brings out the inner child. Guys are more relaxed as compared to trying to act tough. Sheriff Tom Dart, again, just such a challenging job. I mean, he's always being criticized by somebody. We look for activities that relieve anxiety. There's a calming element to pickleball. Here's Gramps. He's 58. The most popular sport on the inside is basketball. Guys love it because so many of them played it growing up. But basketball is dominated by the tall, the young, the athletic. It leaves everybody else out. What he likes about pickleball is my favorite because I don't pump iron to play basketball. I'm definitely the old player out there competing with these kids. And now it gets interesting. The guy in the blue is a great guy, Jim Edmondson. He's in charge of athletics at Cook County Jail. And what he said to me is, hey, this is a carrot. This is a motivating tool. Guys want to play pickleball so much that they're behaving themselves and that we are having fewer fights. Inmates are selected to play based on their behavior. Pickleball is a motivating factor. Now, isn't that terrific? I mean, just think about that. There's less violence on the inside. But the one that really surprised me was Clarence. Clarence and I are sitting on this bench as this picture was taken, and he says, Roger, look out there on the courts. Well, I look out there on the courts. All I see is some guys playing pickleball. He says, no, you don't understand. He says, you got opposite gang members that are playing with and against each other. Some of these guys wouldn't even talk to each other before pickleball. Amazing. Here we go. Outside the jail, a lot of us are enemies. Through this sport, you can see us playing and laughing together. This was taken that day. I spoke to a Rotary group last month. I put up this slide. Somebody said, hey, Roger, which one's you? You guys are smarter than Rotary. You figured it out. I gave a minute, a New York minute, thinking about New York City. Now, the jail in New York City is called Rikers Island. It's an island right off the coast of Manhattan. It's about 400 acres. Boy, do they have problems. They have, the guards use force about 600 times a month. They have literally thousands of assaults each year. They got so many problems that the city council of New York has decided to close it down. That's what it's like. I mentioned to my wife, I said, I think maybe I want to go back to Rikers Island. Her response, no. I grew up in Long Island. You don't want to go back there. Well, I certainly respect her opinion, but, at the same time, Helen Keller once says, life's either a daring adventure or nothing at all. And so I wanted to do a little bit more research on Rikers Island. I asked a couple more people, and one of the people I asked was the former police chief of Seattle. And he was encouraging. I mean, he said the right things, but I learned later on, he told a mutual friend, he said, Roger's thinking about going back to Rikers Island. He doesn't know, but he's not going back to Rikers Island. They're not going to let him back there. All the problems that they have, they're closing the place down because they can't control the drugs on the inside. It just won't happen. Well, many times in life, if you don't know that something's impossible, you just kind of jump in and you do it. So what happened is I ended up back at Rikers Island for a week. And I had a great time. I trained about 100 inmates, and I trained about 20 staff. And at the end of the week, they were playing together. And I'll frankly, at times I got confused between those that went home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and those that spent the night. I mean, I just kind of treated them all the same. I only have one picture for Rikers Island, and this is it. So how did I get this picture? Well, here's what I did. I had my camera, and that was it. All right. But here's what also I have, is after I got back home, there's a letter from the deputy commissioner, and I highlighted one sentence. The next time you return to New York City Department of Corrections, pickleball will have spread throughout our facilities. How about that? 100,000 people flow through there every year, many of them giving group hugs. A lot of publicity. NPR. The way they teased it is one inmate screamed at another, I beat the hell out of you, but if I did, I couldn't play pickleball. Terrific, terrific, if it's reducing violence. NPR, National Pickleball Magazine. The American Jail Association came to me and asked me to write an article for the 2,500 members. And I call this the good and the bad. I got a lot of positive response from this article. But what happened is so many jails around the country said, we don't have the facilities. We don't have a gymnasium where we can support pickleball. We're more of a holding tank because a jail is where you really stay until you go in front of the judge. And then if you're sentenced for a year or so, longer, you go to prison. If you're innocent, you obviously are released. And if you're sentenced for only a couple months, you go back to jail. So that's the good and the bad of what happened in my feedback from the American Jail Association. Even a radio station in Dubai heard about my activities, and they called to interview me. The Desert Sun last year did a very nice piece, and the Desert Sun did such a super job as far as emphasizing pickleball. So here's the question. What is the most read monthly magazine in America? Anybody have an idea? Shout it out. The New Yorker. Well, that's a pretty good guess, but that's not it. Anybody else? No, that's not it. How about this one? Costco Connection. What? 1 out of 11 adults reads the Costco Connection. And when this thing happened, I heard from people all around the country. I heard from politicians. I even heard from an old girlfriend I hadn't talked to in 40 years. She said, Roger, I always knew you'd in a prison. Yeah, okay. In addition to Chicago and New York, taught the game at several sites in Washington State. It always it always goes great. You know, I walk in and I'm perceived as one of these grandpa types. You know, after about 20 minutes or so, I'm become either dude or bro. You know? With a colleague, we opened up Alaska. Corcoran, this is where Charles Manson spent so many years of his life at Corcoran. I have great support out of Sacramento for the Department of Corrections. Opening doors as far as Pelican Bay, the Supermax in this state, Folsom, San Quentin. We were really on a roll. And then COVID hit. Now, you can imagine it's been challenging for all of us on the outside with COVID. But it's been super challenging on the inside for 3 reasons. One is social distancing is absolutely impossible. I mean, it's physically impossible. Number 2 is so many of the staff as well as the inmates won't get shots. All right, but number 3, which is probably the most significant, is staffing. It's not easy to work in a jail or prison. I mean, it's a negative environment. The pay isn't that great. They're always shorthanded. And it's a violent, dangerous place. They always have openings. But since COVID hit, their staffing is down about 20 to 25%. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a warden. You know, what you have is you have some violent men and women out there, mostly men. They're the ones that cause the problems. And you're trying to keep everybody safe. And your staffing is down about 20%. So the best way you have of keeping people safe is, well, you just keep them in cages. We were in the process of opening up Colorado, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts with people that were involved with pickleball. Of course, that all stopped with COVID too. But in the last month or so, things are turning around. I got a call from the Department of Justice, who oversees the federal prison system. He says, let's talk about pickleball. So we're having some communications about that. I got a call last week, and I agreed from the Department of Corrections in Florida. They said, we like the concept. We like the idea of reducing violence. We have 30 sites. What can you do for us? And I've agreed to go down there in January to talk to them and work out some type of system. Yeah, that's really terrific. I'm trading phone calls right now with the Department of Corrections in Ohio. And I think probably something similar to that will happen there. So, let's do this. Let me pause right now and take some questions from you as far as what's on your mind as far as pickleball in prisons. TJ, you going to walk around with a mic? Who has a question? Yeah. I do that all the time. I've taught about 2,000 people on the outside. I frequently teach, there's a health spa called Rancho Mirage. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a very nice health spa outside of San Diego, also around Puget Sound area. I'm going to be teaching it around Rancho Mirage. I'm not exactly sure where, but so I'm opening to questions on that. And I want to thank my sister-in-law for asking that question. No, just kidding. Here, TJ, there's a question up here.
Who provides the equipment?
I get it donated by Pickleball Central, and if necessary, I'll pay for it and have it delivered myself. Over there.
Would you come to Thunderbird and put on a presentation for the members up there?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Grab one of my business cards, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that. You'll hear a lot of the same corny one-liners, though, I'll tell you that. Over here, TJ. Oh. Oh, no. I'd prefer to be on the outside. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Matter of fact, I haven't even had any invites, but no. We got to draw the line.
As a, I'm back here. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm trying to think how the right word to put this, seasoned pickleball player.
Yeah.
That's a good way. In that age range you're talking about, are there other volunteer opportunities for people like myself?
For volunteers?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's pickleball has what they call ambassadors, and there's about 2,000 people that I say they drank the Kool-Aid. They're just like Peggy, you know. They just love this game, and they want to be involved, either maybe assisting at a tournament or basically just sponsoring the game. You know, this is a sport. Barney McCallum and I talked many times about it. It's so active, I guess, and people just kind of fall in love with it. And a woman came up to me a while back, and she said, "You don't remember me. I took a class from you a couple of years ago." And she says, "I think about pickleball 24/7." This grandmother says that. She said, "The last time I was like this, I just discovered boys." Yeah.
All right, over here. Have you thought about how to scale this up so it's not just you going to prisons around the country?
Well, that's going to happen, all right? It's because I get an inquiry about once a month from somebody that says, "I've read about what you're doing. I want to do this in Michigan. How do I do this?" All right? And everything's been on hold right now because of COVID. You know, they're so overwhelmed on the inside that they've had so much of a challenge. But it's going to happen. There's so much more attention to pickleball, and it's doing so many good things for people on the inside. When you can reduce violence, when you can get gang members to talk to each other, I mean, those are all pluses that benefit all of us. And so it's certainly going to happen.
Yeah, okay. Have you been to any women's prisons?
Not just totally women, but I certainly have taught women in Chicago and then also New York at Rikers Island. And it's very well received by them, all right? But here's one of the things I've learned. Men cause most of the problems, all right? And you sit down and you talk to women and you say, not that I ask, but you kind of hear their life story. And it was their boyfriend that got them involved in this, or their husband that got them involved in that. And I remember one gal that said, "Well, my boyfriend and I got drunk, and he decided it was a good idea to go rob a bank." Now, how stupid is that? Really? Yeah. But turn that around. How often would you see a couple get drunk, and the woman would say, "Let's go rob a bank just for the hell of it," right? As my wife says, you know, if women ran the world, there'd be a lot fewer world wars. Yeah. Okay.
Got one here. Roger, great presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Right up here in front.
Okay. Oh, all right. Well, sooner or later, I got to find you, right? I'm looking in the right.
I'd like to address a little bit about the ball hitting the court in terms of, you know, the difference with tennis. So the political aspects of converting tennis courts to pickleball courts, where there's a huge amount of pressure for courts to be opened up. Just wondering some of the successes you've seen in how people go about doing that when the politics of tennis can be somewhat, you know, limiting in terms of we're open to convert courts.
Right.
So just thoughts about that, if you would.
Yeah, well, there's a turf war right now between pickleball and tennis. Pickleball is growing so fast. I mean, you saw the chart, Mark. And naturally, there's a certain amount of friction. You know, they're trying to build an awful lot of new courts. They're converting other courts. Tennis players are saying, "Hey, don't take our courts." And so, you know, it's going through, pickleball is growing so fast, it's going through a certain amount of growing pains, but it will work itself out over time. You know, but pickleball is one of those games you can play on a tennis court, you can play on a cul-de-sac. What you could do is, if you took out the chairs, you could play right in here. And it happens. You play on a gymnasium floor. The court is very easy to play. Portable nets are $125. I told you what paddles are. It's just so easy to go out and have fun. Yeah. The Department of Corrections for California has encouraged me to do that. They've also encouraged me to apply for grant money. I think most definitely in time that's going to happen. We were just really getting the ball rolling, no pun intended, and COVID hit, all right? And so what's happened for that since then is I've kind of been on hold. But most definitely, I think what's going to happen is there'll be a website and a 501c3. Yes?
Yeah, as you know, pickleball can be dangerous, especially for those of us who are under 80, but still over a certain age.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, we take that risk. In the prisons, did you encounter, with all your experience with the inmates, any significant injuries that it might have been a problem, as far as going forward? I guess not, because you keep doing it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Pickleball's had a fair amount of reputation. Well, there's injuries, and there's a couple different. I think TJ and I were talking about this earlier. There's a couple reasons for that. First of all, you have people that have been sitting on the couch for the last 20 years, and all of a sudden they say, "Let's go play pickleball." All right, and so they jump right into it, and they're really out of shape. All right, so that's certainly contributing to the amount of injuries. The second thing is there's so many people that are playing the game. I mean, if you wanted to compare the number of injuries per hour compared to like playing tennis or skiing or many other sports, I don't think there would be nearly as many injuries, all right? I like to call it ping pong on steroids because that's really kind of what it is, all right? There are injuries, certainly. I acknowledge that. The single biggest cause of injuries, believe it or not, are shoes. People wear the wrong shoes. They wear running shoes. Now, running shoes are meant to go in a certain direction, and that's great. But what happens is you get out on the court and you go sideways, you catch an edge, and then you go down. All right? So you need a court shoe, like it's meant for basketball or tennis or volleyball. The place, Rancho Mirage, that I teach at, they have a problem with injuries down there, and they say shoes are what's causing the problem more times than not. So thanks for asking that question. Who's next? Nobody? All right. Okay. I really haven't, and here's the reason. They've encouraged me not to establish relationships with the inmates. I'm there for them. I'm not there to talk about my grandkids, my technique, form relationships. I'm there for them. And one of the officers said to me, he said, "Roger, you're not going to remember these guys, but believe me, some of them will never forget you." All because of this. So, now, I was asked yesterday, has there been any studies as far as how much does it reduce violence and those type of things? Well, no, there hasn't been any studies. It's too early in the game, all right? And frankly, the criminal justice system is so bureaucratic. I mean, I don't know if or when they'll get around to something like that. But I know from firsthand experience how it's helping. Okay. All right. Well, all right, let me wrap it up. Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, hi, Peggy. You got a question? This Peggy's everywhere, isn't she? Yeah. Pickleball, I like to word it this way, is 95% of all inmates are eventually going to be released back into society. 95%. Today's inmate is going to be tomorrow's neighbor. So if there's anything we can do to make them better people on the inside, it's going to make it safer for all of us once they return to society. So group hug, everybody.
Roger, I've quit.
All right.
Just a quick, I actually wanted to ask a question. One question, and then applaud again, because it's a marvelous presentation you're giving. For someone who's a beginning pickleball player, it was so informative, and I have friends that wanted to be here today, but because of Thanksgiving week, they could not. So I'm wanting to know if you can do this again here or at some facility here in Palm Desert or Rancho Mirage where more friends could take it in.
Well, I'd be open to the possibility. I mean, of doing it again. You know, it's a great message, and it's helping a lot of people. And I love pickleball, just like you, Peggy. Thank you.